Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Florida Sound Archive podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Kaiser. And for today's episode, I have on with me a very special guest. You may have heard the names of the following bands: Raped Ape, Malevolent Creation, Divine Empire, and you may also have heard the name JP Soars, because he is here today to tell his story. JP, welcome on into the podcast. Great to have you.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for having me, man.
It's a pleasure. I've been really excited about having you on for a variety of reasons. But number one is I do not know many people who've come from the metal and went over to the blues. So we're going to get into all of that. So let's go back a little bit further.
Sure.
And thinking about some of your earliest beginnings, where you grew up, some of your musical influences, anything else that may have been going on that may have also contributed to what you were getting into musically. So where did that all start for you?
Well, I grew up in Arkansas, right? And my family moved to Florida in '85. So I had just graduated the 10th grade. I went from kindergarten to 10th grade in a little tiny town in northwest Arkansas called Cedarville. And basically was on the same campus from kindergarten to the 10th grade. So same 30 group of kids, and then moved to Florida in '85 with my family to Wellington, Florida, and went to Forest Hill High School, graduated there. Our graduating class was 500 kids. So needless to say, moving from that little rural small town in Arkansas to Florida at that time at 16 years old was quite the culture shock,
Oh, I bet.
I grew up around music. My parents were into music and stuff. My dad played guitar and not professionally. He played around the house and stuff. And, they'd have parties and his friends would come over and jam. And I was always just mesmerized by it from the time I was a little kid, like, wow, I would love to do that someday. And, when I was about 11 years old, my dad started showing me, just basic chords and songs on guitar, and whatever he showed me, I could pick it up pretty naturally, pretty effortlessly. And I think that's part of the gift, that people talk about, this gift of music and gift of talent. For me, the gift was the ability to learn, to like, wow, okay, I can do this, and to learn fairly easily, pick things up, and came very naturally to me. So that's kind of my first foray into music and wanting to play music. And I knew from the time I was a little kid that's what I wanted to do.
What were you listening to at that age?
Well, when I was in the 4th grade, my parents brought home, they brought home this record right here. And, right, I was in the 4th grade and they brought home this record, Kiss Love Gun. And I didn't have a record player, right? So for 3 months, I just stared at this cover and was like, oh my God, I know this is going to be awesome. I had never heard them, had no idea what it sounded like, but just looking at the cover, I was like, this is freaking going to be awesome. So for like 3 or 4 months, I just looked at the cover, right? And finally, my uncle moved in with us and he had a record player. And so I got to listen to it. And I remember putting the needle on the record and it blew my mind. I was like, oh my God, I never heard anything that sounded like this. It totally was above and beyond my expectations or my imagination of what it was going to sound like. And so I was listening to that. I initially wanted to be a drummer. I wanted to be freaking Peter Criss, that's what I saw. The guitar, that's too hard, that's got all these strings and all this stuff. That's too hard to do. I want to play drums. I used to set up little pots and pans and stuff and try to jam along to Kiss records and shit. And then, and then my dad, like I said, my dad started showing me stuff when I was about 11, on guitar. And I was like, oh, I can do this. This is not as difficult as I thought it was. But and my parents were listening to like the Beatles, Bob Dylan, Neil Young, that kind of stuff. And I had some uncles that were into some more kind of heavy stuff like Ted Nugent, that was something I listened to a lot when I was younger. The Stranglehold album and the Weekend Warriors album, to be specific.
Right.
But so I was listening to that stuff, you know, stuff that my parents and my uncles were listening to, and of course, you know, discovered that Kiss record, and that just was like, oh my God. And then I had another uncle later on that gave me the Kiss Alive album, which again blew my mind. The
Right.
drum solo on 100,000 Years is still one of my favorite, coolest things, man.
And I believe that
Yeah,
was a gatefold record sleeves when you opened it up, all these pictures of the band and the fire and all that.
yeah, yeah. It was just like, wow, you know,
Yeah,
you know, like you know, a 9-year-old little kid. It was awesome.
it is. Yeah. So think about some of those early moments. What concert experiences did you have as you were growing up?
First concert I went to, I was 16 years old, and it was kind of it was a few months actually before we moved to Florida. Me and my buddies, my friend Tim Womack, we were kind of playing a little music together at the time. He got tickets to go see Molly Hatchet and Pat Travers at Fort Smith, Harper Stadium in Fort Smith. It's a small little stadium. Seemed a lot bigger at the time. When I drive by it now, I'm like, oh, that's a small little stadium. But that was my first concert that I seen, and it blew my mind. You know, and Pat Travers opened the show, and then Molly Hatchet came on, and it was just like, oh my God, this is freaking, you know, it was killer. It was great. It was a great concert.
Did you know at that early age that a band like Molly Hatchet was from Florida?
No, I did not. I didn't know that they were from Florida and Pat Travers. And what's crazy is like 5 years ago or so, I got to open up for him here in Boca at the Funky Biscuit, right? At this club here in Boca. I got to open up for him, and I was like so excited, you know, and I met him. He was cool. I told him, I was like, man, I saw you guys play when I was 16 years old at the, you know, Fort Smith Harper Stadium in 1985. You probably don't remember it, but, you know, that, yeah, it was just pretty cool, full circle thing, you know?
Totally.
Yeah.
Total full circle moment. Wow.
Yeah. I got a few other ones of those too we'll get into.
That's amazing to hear. That was one of your earliest concerts. And
Yeah.
anyone else come to mind you had a chance to also see back then?
Well, we moved to Florida shortly after that. You know, like I said, when I was 16. And another concert, one of the first concerts I went to down here. Well, I went to the Ultimate Sin tour. I saw that with Jakey Lee, you know, Ozzy and Jakey Lee. That was great. That was in '87, I believe. And then another, you know, real landmark concert for me was the Cameo Theater, Anthrax, Celtic Frost, and Exodus. And that was probably, I think that was '87. I still have the ticket stub somewhere. I believe that was 1987. Might have been '88. But
Wow.
it blew my mind. That's the first time I ever seen a mosh pit or people stage diving and shit like that. And I was just like, holy shit. I'm like, I want to do that and make people do that. And I mean, people were climbing up the freaking PA speakers and diving off, and it was insane. I was like, I never witnessed anything like that.
That's crazy. I was going to ask you,
Yeah.
you know, being so young, what was your first thought when you stepped foot in the Cameo?
It blew my mind. I was like, holy shit, this is freaking crazy. Like these people are nuts, man. But I loved it. It was freaking awesome. Yeah.
When
And then, of course, Monsters of Rock. You know, I saw the Monsters of Rock tour, and we specifically went there to see Metallica. That's who we, you know. I mean, there were no videos back then and stuff. We just knew what they looked like from pictures and shit. And
was that
then,
the one with Van Halen and
yeah,
Scorpions? Okay.
Dokken, Van Halen,
Yeah.
Scorpions, and they were great. It was great to see Van Halen and those bands. But me and my friends, we went to see Metallica. That's who we were freaking. That was what we were excited to see.
I just had Matt Fox on, who is in and still is playing with the band Shai Hulud, and
Okay.
he had mentioned that that was one of his earliest concerts was the Monsters of Rock, and he went specifically for Metallica as well. So
Yeah. Well, what's crazy, man, is you know, fast forward to like 2016. I'm playing in Jupiter, this little club with my blues band, and Jason Newsted shows up. he lives in Jupiter, right? So he shows up to the gig. He loves the band, buys a cigar box guitar off of me. Uh, he and I have become good friends. And I actually got Jason to play on one of my blues albums. He's playing on the title track of my Southbound I-95 record,
Wow.
which came out in 2018. And that's another one of these full circle moments I'm telling you about. Like, and we get together and jam and stuff. He's given me a couple of guitars. In fact, he he gifted me this guitar back in 2016. It's one of my favorite guitars. I use it a lot for recording, and he signed the back there and everything. And I don't know if you can see that, but pretty amazing, man. Full circle moments.
That is amazing. And how
Yeah,
cool that you were able to connect with him because he was at one of your gigs.
yeah, exactly. And he didn't have, when he first met me, he didn't realize my background and stuff. And I was explaining, like, they don't understand it. I'm a fucking huge Metallica fan, and I saw you guys at the, Monsters of Rock, and just the whole thing. And it's one of them full circle moments. I never would have thought in a
Sure.
million years that, I'd become friends with this guy, and he would wind up playing on one of my records.
How amazing. And again, full circle moments that we're
Full circle. Yeah.
talking about here. So very, very cool. At what point did you start to discover that there was local music going on?
Um, Probably, I want to say it was right around the time that I joined Raped Ape. When I got in that band, I'd seen them play at a couple of parties. Like they would have these keg parties and stuff out in Loxahatchee, and I remember seeing them play at a couple of those, and I was like, wow, these guys are freaking tight. They sound like a real band. And Pooch was freaking badass, still is. And yeah, when I joined that band, that was kind of like my introduction to this whole local scene. And in fact, I was just telling George Kokoris, the drummer from Boogallard, I ran into him the other night. I hadn't seen him in 30 years or so. And I was telling, like, the first time when I saw them, Malevolent Creation, my friends Fatal Sin, and me and the guys in Raped Ape, we all went down to see Fatal Sin, our friends, and Malevolent was playing that night, and Boogallard was playing that night. And there might have been a couple other local bands on the bill at the very beginning, and it was at the Treehouse in Fort Lauderdale. And that was my first. Oh, I know who else was on that bill. It was Elysium, the band Elysium. And again, my mind was blown. I was like, holy shit, there's this crazy scene. And all the bands were good. They were tight, original, and young, and just like this scene, and that was my first kind of introduction to the local scene. It was a nice, healthy competition amongst all these bands and stuff, and everybody was trying to be the heaviest, craziest, most brutal stuff, and that produced some really cool, groundbreaking music. I
No
mean,
doubt.
I'd never heard anything like that before.
Right.
And
And where you were growing up, though, in the Palm Beach area, some of the bands you mentioned, like, Raped Ape at the time, and I believe Fatal Sin as well, were out of Palm Beach. Were there other bands that you were learning about that were also fairly close to where you were living?
mm, not really. No, no. I mean, there was a couple of like my one of my buddies. We had a little band called called Fugitive before I joined Rape Ape and stuff, and we were just playing covers, like Metallica covers, some Judas Priest covers, and stuff like that. And but my friend Kevin had seen this band, Tough Luck, and this is kind of before all the Rape Ape and stuff, before I joined that band or heard of them or anything. And he had saw this band Tough Luck play at the Rock and Roll Cafe or something, and he bought their cassette. And we used to drive around listening to that. They were a little more on the glam side and stuff, not as crazy and heavy, but they were good. The guitar player, Dave Scott, still friends with him, actually. He plays blues now, too.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I think he was probably only 16, 17 at the time when he recorded that record, but just badass, just ripping, killer guitar playing and stuff. And yeah, so that was one of the first, I think, local bands that we were kind of into and stuff.
That's awesome. That's a great story. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Tough Luck. I have that cassette too, and
Yeah, tonight.
yeah, it's good
Yeah,
stuff. Because again, to your point, I mean, they were kind of more on the hair side, but
yeah.
they weren't totally over the edge. You know, like
No,
some of the other
they had
bands
the
of that
rock and
era.
roll element. Yeah, they had
Yeah,
that rock and roll element, and they were
definitely.
yeah, and like I said, they had Dave Scott was just this ripping, you know, killer guitar player. He still is. He's like this every time I see him play, he's always got a great tone. His phrasing is awesome. He plays just cool stuff, and you can always hear every single note he's playing and very musical.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the Treehouse, which was in Hallandale, I guess
Yeah.
no, Greater Fort Lauderdale, kind of on the way down south to like Hollywood, that part of
Yeah.
that part. And you think about some other places that you may have been going to. What else was a spot where, maybe middle of the week or a Friday or Saturday you'd find yourself? Was there any other spots you were going to catch?
Well,
Whether you were going there just to watch other bands or whether you were starting to play
yeah.
out, what other places come to mind?
Well, shortly after, um, I had went to the Treehouse and discovered that, and we wound up playing there with Raped Ape because our buddies in Fatal Sin, they uh, they introduced us to the owner and basically helped us get booked in there. So we started playing the Treehouse um, with Raped Ape. But another place that opened up shortly thereafter that was in West Palm Beach, and it was a bass player from Raped Ape at the time, Rattlehead. He knew these other guys, and they opened up a club in West Palm. It was called the Pit, right? And at that time, there weren't a lot of, that very early on, there weren't really a lot of places to play in West Palm Beach, the Palm Beach area and stuff for what we were doing. We were, stream heavy stuff. Um, so that club, when it opened up, it was like, okay, this is our club. This is our freaking place where we get to play the music we want to play. And, it was called the Pit. And so I saw a lot of great bands there. We opened up for Sepultura there on their first U.S. tour, the Beneath the Remains tour. We got to open up for Sepultura. I saw Death play there. I saw
Wow.
Exodus play there. Um, Agnostic Front. Um, and that was a whole cool little scene that was happening. So I would go there a lot. Yeah. I mean, I would hang out there, and we were playing there, and it was cool, man. It was because we had our own little like this is our scene, this is our club, and these are our people and our little tribe of freaks and metalheads and shit. It was cool.
That is really neat to hear how you had the opportunity to open up for some of you mentioned Sepultura when they were
Yeah.
there for their Beneath the Remains record, which,
Obituary. I saw Obituary play there. Deicide.
okay. So you're mentioning some of these other bands. You mentioned Death already. These bands that were out of Florida, Obituary as
Yeah.
well, and Deicide. Did you connect that at that point that these guys are just a little north of us?
Oh yeah, yeah. We knew that there was a scene going on in Tampa and stuff. We actually also we opened up for Morbid Angel on the Altars of Madness tour. Back they were touring in a school bus. And I remember they came in and set up this whole drum riser and everything, and we're like, wow, these guys are freaking, these guys are dedicated, hardcore, and again, that was a mind blowing show. Like holy shit, this is fast, crazy. This is a whole nother level of
Yeah.
extremism right here. Uh, so
Wow.
that was neat. But yeah, and I remember like the first. The first couple times when we ventured over to Tampa, and for us that was like going to freaking California or something, as we'd never really been out of Palm Beach, Broward area and stuff. So getting to go over and play in Tampa was like this whole crazy thing. And we went and visited Morrisound Studios, which we wound up recording there with Scott Burns, eventually, a few years later and stuff. But, going over to Tampa and that whole scene and knowing, all those bands that were from over there, Deicide, Obituary, um, uh, Morbid Angel, and going into Morrisound and go, wow, this is, and seeing those records on the wall, like this is where those records are recorded, and meeting Scott Burns and everything. It was an awesome time, man.
Oh, I can only imagine. Was that one of the first times you were ever in a studio like that?
It was, yeah. We were the first time I went in the studio was when we recorded the Raped Ape demo, Perpetual Aggravation, and we went down to Miami, recorded at Natural Sound, and it's a small little 16-track studio. But that was my first time in the studio, and I remember I was so nervous. I was like, "Oh my God, am I going to be able to pull this off when I get in there? Am I going to, So I practiced and practiced and practiced my ass off so I would be prepared. So I was so nervous that I wouldn't be able to pull it off. And of course, we went in and basically cut that demo all playing together live and stuff. Pooch overdubbed the vocals and a few solos, and that was it. And and we pulled it off. And I remember listening back going, "Holy shit! I actually was able to do this, it work." And then, I was nervous and freaked out for nothing, but that's what made me prepared because I was so fucking nervous. And then I remember there was a radio station, WSHE, at Glenn Richards, and they would have a local hour, I think on like Monday nights or something, where he would play local bands. And I remember the first time hearing, our Raped Ape demo, them playing a couple songs off of it on the radio, and that was like, oh my God, we've arrived. Yeah,
I bet just that moment of hearing your band and hearing that on the radio, and
yeah,
others have mentioned Glenn Richards as being very important with what
yeah.
he had done as a disc jockey back then on WSHE. Was there anything else going on like that radio wise that you thought was important, or maybe even other
Well,
publications? Were there any kind of zines or fanzines that you think also were helpful to what you
there
guys were
was
doing?
definitely fanzines, and that was really cool. We had us. There was one called DBN magazine. There was another one out of Miami. I forget the name of it, but that was cool. Yeah, there was these just little fanzines and stuff, and you get them once a month or something. We did that with Raped Ape for a while. We put out our little monthly newsletter and stuff, and that was one of the things we would do. On certain nights we would all get together and have these. We get together at our drummer JC's house, and we'd all sit around folding up these newsletters and stuff and mailing them out. And it kept growing. The fan base kept growing. We first we did it once a month, and then we started doing it like every 2 months, and then it became like every 3 or 4 months and stuff because it just kept growing. But I know another cool thing that was happening back then at that time. This is right around the time when I joined Raped Ape, and slightly before was the bass player Rattlehead. He had a station called WMTL, and it didn't extend too far. I think you could only hear it within like I'm going to say maybe 100-mile radius. It was a pirate radio station. He was running it out of his house, not legally and stuff. But so you could drive around Lake Worth Beach and stuff on a Friday night and listen to WMGL, and he'd be playing freaking all this metal stuff and Megadeth, and he would play, some of the Raped Ape stuff as well, and so that was really cool, WMTL. I was talking to somebody last night about it that from the old scene. A friend of mine showed up, and his girlfriend used to come see the Rape Tape shows and stuff, and she was saying, "I just dug out my old WMTL T-shirt," and so that was cool, man. It was just really just groundbreaking, just underground scene.
Right.
Yeah.
So while all this is going on, were you at all listening to other types of music besides metal, like, I don't know, the blues maybe?
Absolutely, absolutely. I was. I've always been into any kind of music that moves me. I was listening to freaking. There was a band. They were called the Sundays. I think they're still around, and they were like this poppy girl band from England and stuff. But they had some cool songs, and I was into that. I was into Edie Brickell and New Bohemians. I was listening to that stuff. Um, and I was also listening to, like I said, I was listening to the Steely Dan. I had that 8-track in my freaking '76 Malibu. That's what it came with. So I'm playing in Raped Ape, and I'm driving around listening to Steely Dan Asia record. But another point I'll make is, before I joined Raped Ape or any of that, it was in February of 1988. I put my name in a raffle at a guitar store, and it was to win a guitar and 2 tickets to go see B.B. King, have him sign the guitar. So I put my name in a raffle. The lady's like, "Today's the last day. You should register for it." Okay. So I did. I put my name on a little piece of paper, put it in a thing. And I think because I was one of the last ones to register, when they pulled the thing out, my ticket was on top, right? That's the only rhyme or reason I can make of it. So like a week later, I come home and my mom's all excited. "Oh, this radio station called and said you won this $1,200 Gibson guitar and two tickets to go see B.B. King and meet him backstage and have him sign the guitar." And so I couldn't believe it. I was like, there's got to be some kind of catch. There's no way they're just going to hand me this guitar. So I called the radio station. They said, "Yeah, call down to the music store." Called the music store. Drove down there. The lady said, "Yeah, just bring your ID in." Showed the lady my ID. She walked in the back, came out with the case. I opened it up. I was like, holy shit. It's white Gibson SG with gold hardware on it. I still have the guitar, of course. And then like a week later, my dad and I went and seen B.B. King play at the Carefree Theater, front row, center stage we sat at. And again, it blew my mind. This was I was only 18. This is before I had joined Raped Ape or any of that. And so I got to witness B.B. King, and it was mind blowing, mesmerized. And then I got to meet him backstage and have him sign the guitar. And I just remember him being the kindest, most humble, down to earth person you'd ever want to meet. You never would have thought or felt like you're talking to a legend, a living legend, which he was at the time, of course. And I remember him sitting down and holding the guitar in his hand. He's like, "This is an awfully pretty guitar. You sure you want me to sign this?" And "Yes, sir. Of course, Mr. King. Absolutely." And so my dad and I left that concert, and I knew that was timeless music, right? And I knew that was music that was cut straight to my soul in a different way than the metal stuff did. I remember first time I heard Master of Puppets album, it blew my mind, cut straight to my soul, but in a different way. And we left that concert, my dad and I, and my dad was like, "That's the kind of shit you need to learn to play." And I knew from that time, I go, this is music that I can play for anybody who's going to dig this stuff. I could play this for my grandmother. I could play this for my nephew. I could play this for, it's timeless. Just way more of an umbrella. The metal for me was like this very specific, since some people don't like it, a lot of people didn't dig it, and I can totally understand why. It's not for everybody. I loved it. I freaking totally got it. I still love it. But I knew at that time, I go, this is music that I could see myself playing when I'm in my freaking 50s and when I'm in my 60s. And now I'm 57. And so, so before I was in any of the metal bands, I had already had that experience, and that seed had already been planted in me. I'm a self-taught musician, so I had no idea where to even start to try to play blues. The whole time I'm playing in these metal bands and stuff, I'm also listening to blues and stuff, and people know that I like blues, so they maybe turn me on to stuff or give me this record, and I would read articles about, Stevie Ray Vaughan and interviews with him and things like that, and the Allman Brothers and Jimi Hendrix, and they would talk about their influences. I would hear them name Muddy Waters, T-Bone Walker, Albert King, and so I started searching out that stuff. And I also started going to blues jams around that same time, trying to, and I wouldn't, I might get to sit in, maybe not. I didn't know enough to sit in, so I would just go and observe and watch and listen and try to learn and absorb. So all that was going on simultaneously. playing in Raped Ape and going in the studio for the first time, listening to all this different music that was, it was coming out and around at the time. And even when I was like, when I would go tour with Divine Empire, because people ask me sometimes, well, when did you make the transition from playing, metal to blues? There was never like this definitive moment where it happened. It was just kind of like I was absorbing all this stuff around, it simultaneously. I'd be on the road with Divine Empire, and a lot of times maybe we were the opening band or the second band on a bill of 5 bands or something, and we'd be touring around. So we would play our 30-minute or 45-minute set, whatever, and then we'd have another 3 hours before the whole, rolling entourage of bands started heading to the next city. So first thing I would do when I'd get to town, sometimes I would pick up a local magazine or, fanzine or paper and, find out where, there's a blues jam happening down the street here tonight, So I would finish our set, Divine Empire, and I'd go get in a cab and head over to a blues jam. Of course, I would get there and be like, yeah, introduce myself. Yeah, I'm on tour. I'm this guy from Florida and I'm on tour right now. I wouldn't say I'm on tour at this, crazy metal, circus that's playing down the street. I said, I'm just on tour. And they would go, oh, really? Oh, come on, sit in with us and stuff. So, I would do that simultaneously. I'd go tour at Divine Empire and come home, and 2 or 3 nights later, I'd be playing a blues gig, So it's all happened kind of simultaneously.
Sure. Did you ever get any looks from people, considering you had really long hair and you had, I imagine, a look because you were into metal at that time too?
Well, I was into metal, and I still am. I still love it, and I still have my hair. But I look like I can adapt, and I can. And I've always had that ability to, I believe, adapt and kind of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Blend in?
Settle into the scene without, I still have my long hair, man. I still fucking, if I get the call from Slayer or, Cannibal Corpse to go do a tour, I'm ready, man. I'm ready to go. So, but so I would, I would adapt, and I would try to not, portray that, if I would, simply, tie my hair up, put a hat on, and bam, I'm ready to go. I would get weird looks though sometimes, like when I first started playing in blues bands down here in like the early 2000s. I was still playing in Divine Empire stuff at the time, right? And I would, I would play in these bands, backing these guys up and stuff. And for like the first couple of months or whatever, I wouldn't mention that I also, I'm also playing with this crazy band, Divine Empire. So after like 3 months of jamming with these guys or something, I'd be like, hey, by the way, I do this other thing too. Check out this album. And they would be like, what the fuck? I would get some strange looks then. Yeah.
I know we were talking about some of the different bands. You mentioned already Divine Empire. Before you got there, though, when Raped Ape had changed its name to Pain God, what was that experience like for you playing shows? Because the sound also had changed, I think, too, a little bit.
It did. We started tuning down to D. We were all the Raped Ape stuff. We were tuned to standard E, A440, and then we saw, we opened up for Biohazard, and that kind of shifted our direction a little bit. When we first, when Raped Ape stuff, we were, Pooch and I were trying to write these, most technical riffs possible. I remember sometimes it'd be like, it could have been the coolest riff, but if it wasn't like difficult and hard to play, we would just like, it's, we would write it off and shit. And we kind of, eventually we wind up getting in more into like groove and songwriting and trying to, our style evolved. It definitely did. And then, we opened up for Biohazard, and that kind of changed our whole outlook on things and stuff. Like, we want to groove, and so we started tuning down. We tuned down to D, and that definitely changed our sound.
Sure.
At the time, I thought it was cool and stuff, but in hindsight, I feel like our peak was the Terminal Reality record, the record we did with Scott Burns. You know, that was before we changed the name. And the reason we changed the name was because we couldn't get signed. Every label would be like, oh, man, you guys are great, but that name just, and I understand, you know, I totally understand it, you know, where they were coming from. And we had a deal pending with Century Media Records, and they were like, you know, we'll sign you guys, but you gotta change the name. And that's what we did.
It's a car term, right? Raped Ape.
It is. It means
Yeah.
the original singer came up with that name. It means like if a car runs fast and runs really good, you know, they say, oh, it runs like a raped ape, you know.
Right.
I always felt awkward, you know, saying that name, you know, what's the name of your band? Ah, it's, you know, it's Raped Ape, you know, like it. I always felt kind of awkward about that for obvious
Sure.
reasons. But it's definitely a name you don't forget, you know. And there's
No.
there's lots of folks around with, you know, with Raped Ape tattoos and shit on them and stuff. Yeah.
And you mentioned Terminal Reality, which what a record that is. When you think back on that, and I don't know how often you may revisit some of those moments, but the last time you listened to that, like what did you think about it?
I'll tell you, the last time I listened to it was because we released some of that stuff about a couple of years ago, 30th anniversary of that album. We recorded that in '93. So JC, our drummer, you know, he helped remaster the stuff, and so we re-released that, and I walked around my neighborhood and I put my headphones on and I listened to it and I was like, holy shit, that's fucking good, man. Tight, articulate. You can understand the riffs. JC's drumming is awesome. Just, you know, everything about it. I'm like, wow, I can't believe we did that when we were freaking, you know, 22, 23 years old. But we were very serious about what we were doing. We used to practice 4 nights a week in a sweaty warehouse, you know, working on, you know, one song for however long to get it tight and precise and the way we wanted it. We really worked hard. And Pooch, you know, he was a perfectionist. I consider him a genius, man, and on multiple levels, not only musically but artistically and just as a human being. You know, he's real smart, very intelligent guy, and he's the one that helped me like get the guitar sound together and stuff. You know, that's why I have the Marshall amplifier that I had, which I still have to this day, and I still have all my guitars from that era. But you know, Pooch was very precise. You know, his right hand was like so articulate, and you know, so I learned a lot. You know, playing, you know, from him back in that day, and it was he set the bar, you know,
Right.
high. And we did for ourselves. We wanted, you know, we were very critical of ourselves, and we wanted to be as tight and as we could possibly be. You know, we took it very, very seriously. We weren't into partying and, you know, and drugs and all that kind of shit and drinking and raising. No, we never. We were always about the music and being as, you know, as tight and as good as we possibly could be.
And it's such a great record. And for those that haven't checked out Pooch's episode on the podcast, I'll drop that in the description of this one. And speaking of past guests, Jim Hayward recently was on the podcast. And
Oh
he
yeah,
was
I enjoyed that. Yeah, I
the
watched
manager
that.
of
Yeah.
Raped Ape. So talk about your relationship with Jim and what was that like working with him back then?
Jim was great, man. It was awesome, and that happened very early on in the Rape Ape stuff, and that was actually Rattlehead is the one that brought him into the picture. He knew him from the Palm Beach Post and stuff, and that was great. Jim did so much for us, and you know, he worked hard, and you know, got us on these, like, you know, Miami Rocks 2 and some of these showcases in Atlanta and things like that, and you know, it was his idea to do the whole newsletter, this, you know, and stuff. You know, the Primal Horde newsletter we had. He came up with the Slammy Awards and stuff. And Jim was a very integral part of what we were doing in the band and just the whole scene. You know, absolutely. He was a pleasure to work with. You know, he was very organized and had his shit together. You know.
Did you feel like the band was starting to get other shows or opportunities? Perhaps you were playing in other spots that you may not have been playing in before.
Absolutely, yeah. Jim, he was the one that made the Tampa connection over there with like Ben Meyer from Gardy Lou, and Ben Meyer, he was Nasty Savage, but I think they had already split up at the time or something, and he had started this band, that punk rock band Gardy Lou, with the bass player Richard Bateman and
That's a
stuff.
band that doesn't get name dropped enough. So
No,
what are your memories of Gardy Lou?
they were cool, man. They were these punk rock, just like you know, uh, crazy dudes, and they were they were a few years older than us, so we kind of looked up to them, and of course Ben had been in Nasty Savage and everything, so we would go over there, and I think we actually stayed at Ben's house a few times when we went over there, and just hearing him tell all these stories of Nasty Savage, and he had some videos of them playing in like Poland in front of these massive crowds and shit, and we were like, that's freaking awesome, man. Yeah. So that Jim, he would facilitate a lot of that stuff, getting us into other markets and things like that, up in Orlando. I mean, we started traveling to Orlando and Jacksonville, and
What were the scenes like up there?
it was cool. Yeah, there was a band in Orlando called Nephobia that we used to kind of play with. That's one thing we would do. We would make friends with another band in different towns and stuff, and they would bring us up to their scene, and we'd bring them down to our scene down here. It was really cool, man. The whole tape trading stuff that was going on back then, and just it was this thriving underground scene. There was another band from South Carolina, I think that we teamed up with. I think we did a vinyl split with them. They were called Bloody Mary, I believe was in the name of that band. So they would we would bring them down and stuff. And Jim Hayward was the one facilitating all that stuff.
It's great to hear some of these stories and just these connections. And when you had the chance to play in other parts of the state, how did the other people around you, whether they were band members or just other people you're meeting in the scene, did they ever catch wind or know like there's this guy who's going to like these blues gigs too and he's looking for opportunities to
Yeah.
like what'd they think about that back then?
I mean, I'm not for sure what they thought, but I think they embraced it, because I've always been all about the music, and learning and stuff, and I've always been, my whole goal was I wanted to be a musician. This is what I wanted to do for a living, regardless if it was making it in a band or doing studio stuff or whatever the case was. I knew that I wanted to make my living being a musician. And I knew that if I wanted to do that, well, I need to really learn. And I didn't, you know, I I didn't want to be, I didn't want to pigeonhole myself into one thing. I've always been really open-minded about music. I like Latin music. I like country music. I like, bossa nova music. I like Django Reinhardt. Went through a huge phase of, the Django Reinhardt stuff where I was trying to learn that stuff. And I love jazz. I love Miles Davis. I love Tito Puente. I love, just Albert King and B.B. King. And if it moves me, I dig it.
Right.
I don't care what the genre is. And that's, I've always kind of approached things like that, and try not to limit myself. And like I said, my goal has always been to be a musician,
Right.
and be
Sure.
able to adapt, be able to adapt. And, I mean, if I get a call from, somebody right now to go, not that I would probably do it, but, if I get a call from, this Cannibal Corpse or whatever the case may be, you know, I can do that. I could go do that shit,
Sure.
If
Did you
I
know
get a
that
call from Kev Mo to go do a tour with Kev Mo, I can,
you're gonna go do
I
it?
can adapt and do that, you know.
Did you know those guys in Cannibal Corpse, considering they were also playing in Florida too?
Yeah, I did. Well, I was good friends with Rob, Rob Barrett, who had Solstice. Rob used to come to all the, he was in the scene back in the day. We used to play a lot with those guys with Raped Ape, and Rob was a, Raped Ape fan, and we were a fan of Solstice and stuff. And then when he joined Cannibal Corpse early on and stuff. So yeah, I mainly knew Rob. I met some of them other guys, and like when we were up recording the Malevolent Creation album, like '94. I think it was '93. Yeah, '94. I believe that was. Or maybe '95. I believe. Yeah, and
Was that in
those
Cold
guys,
Blood?
yeah, in Cold
Okay.
Blood.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we recorded that with Scott Burns, and some of those guys came around the studio and hung out and stuff. Some of the Cannibal guys, Alex Webster, and we were good friends also with Monstrosity, with Lee Harrison and those guys. I became really good friends with a guitar player, Jason Morgan, who played on and I believe he played on the Millennial album. Yeah, a Millennium album, not Millennial album, Millennium. Yeah, and Jason and I hit it off really good because I remember the first time I met him, we played this show. I think it was in Orlando or something with Monstrosity. That's the first time I met Jason, and me and him went up to his hotel room and sit around and jammed and stuff, and he could play stuff other than metal, and I was like, oh, this is cool, man. This guy's, he's like a he's a well-rounded musician, can play other, and he and I hit it off, in which we went on to do a couple albums together, with called Winjara. I don't know if you're familiar with that. We put out
Yeah.
2 records on
Yep.
Nocturnal Art. The Samoth from Emperor, he had a label called Nocturnal Art Productions, and we put out 2 records on that. The Winjara albums. And Jason was, again, he's another one of those folks that I consider to be a genius. Just such an amazing guitar player, and a real master of the instrument. Just I've never seen anybody rip solos like that and shit. Just amazing, man. He was a big influence, and again, very much a perfectionist. Nothing would slip by him.
How did you get connected with the Malevolent Creation guys?
Well, I mean, I knew them guys from way early on. We used to play together all the time in the scene, Raped Ape and stuff. But the way that kind of happened was, it's funny you mentioned that, because we were doing that little Banjara project with Jason Morgan, from Monstrosity, and Derek Roddy had joined Malevolent Creation. This was in like 90, I'm going to say around 94, right? Something like that. Yeah. And Derek had joined Malevolent, and he was this, cool dude he was from South Carolina, and, had an accent and stuff. And I said, this is a good old boy, shit. So we were doing the Winjara, and we recorded all that stuff with the drum machine, right? And we had just a little demo at the time we'd done with the drum machine, and we're like, man, we want to play this shit, with a real drummer and stuff. So we started jamming with Derek, and we would practice in the Malevolent Creation warehouse down there, right? And this was all around the same time that, that Pooch had went off to do the tattooing and stuff. So he was pretty much done with the band, and things were kind of fizzling out with the Raped Ape and the Pain God after 8 years of us beating the trenches trying to do something, and everyone was just kind of getting into different music stuff. JC had got into Gone Mad, the band he played with for a while and stuff, after the Pain God, Raped Ape stuff. I was more getting into the blues stuff, and kind of getting away from that shit. But anyway, so we were doing this Winjara project, and we would practice in the Malevolent warehouse, and sometimes we would show up, and it would just be you know Derek and I. Well, actually, no. Let me go back a little bit. So we were practicing in the Malevolent warehouse with Derek, and Derek is the one that got me into Malevolent. They were going to record the Malevolent Creation album, and Derek had brought a friend down from South Carolina. Man, I cannot even remember his name right now. I think his name was Jason as well. Jason Hagen, I believe his name was. Yeah, and he was playing with the band. And he quit and moved back to South Carolina. So Derek called me and said, "Hey, man, why don't you come and record this Malevolent album with us and stuff?" And I was like, "Well, shit, I don't have a band right now, really. The Raped Apes broke up, Pain God's not together anymore and stuff." I'm like, that was the first time in 8 years I hadn't had a band. So I was like, "Sure, man, I'll go do the Malevolent stuff." I've always been a fan of Malevolent and loved them. And so I started playing with Malevolent, and that's how Divine Empire started. Actually, was because a lot of times we go to rehearsal, the Malevolent Creation warehouse, and sometimes it would just be me and Derek and Jay, the bass player there, because maybe Phil had something going on, or he couldn't make it to the rehearsal or whatever, or showed up, wound up getting there an hour after we had already been there and stuff. So it'd just be the three of us jamming, and stuff, and then one by one, everybody kind of quit Malevolent after we did the In Cold Blood record. I think Derek was the first one. He was like, he quit the band and moved back up to South Carolina. And then when they went to go on tour, I was working for Motorola at the time. And, Phil's like, "Oh, we're going to go to this European tour." And I said, "Man, I would love to do it, but I can't get the time off work, and I don't want to jeopardize my job and stuff." So that was my kind of exit out of that. I only played one show with them, but I did record the record.
You did.
And
Was that your second time also at Morrisound at that point?
it was, yep, yep,
What was
yep.
that difference between the time that you were there in the Raped Ape years and then transferring
Um,
to Malevolent?
to me, Scott was kind of on the, Scott Burns was kind of like, you could tell that he was kind of, I'm not going to say done with it, but maybe over it. He was just kind of like, the enthusiasm wasn't the same as it was when we did the Rape Ape stuff. I felt like a little bit, but it was
Remember,
still.
do you
Go ahead.
remember do you remember working at all with his assistant, Steve Heritage?
Yes, I did. He had that band called Ass Suck.
He did. So
Yeah,
what are your memories of Steve back then?
Steve was cool, man. He was like this punk rock alternative grindcore, yeah, man. And we played with this band a couple of times. We brought them down to Miami to play with us a few times, and they were awesome. They were like this crazy grindcore, they would fall down on the stage when they're playing their guitars and spaz out and stuff. Yeah, it was cool, man. Steve was cool. Yeah. Yep.
Interesting to hear that. Was that they played with you guys? Was that during the Malevolent years or Divine Empire?
No, that was more of the Rape Ape
Oh,
years. Yeah.
Raped Ape years.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, when we did I don't think he was working there when we did the Malevolent stuff. He was the assistant when we did the Rape Ape stuff.
Okay.
And that's how
Sure.
we got to know Steve. Yeah. Like I said, he had that band Ass Sucker. They were cool.
Yeah, definitely. So very interesting. So you played with Malevolent, didn't do really a lot of shows, but you were
Yep.
on the In Cold Blood
Yep.
recording. And the one show that you did play with them, did you have any memories of where that was?
Yeah. It was at the Kitchen Club in Miami. And that was right after Derek had split. So Crazy Larry was playing drums. And right before I stopped doing the band, it was this crazy fucking thing that happened, man. Like Larry died in a fire. Crazy Larry. He used to work on these surfboards and stuff, I guess, and his garage caught on fire because there were some of the chemicals that he was using to resurface these surfboards and shit. And from what I understand, he like went back in to save the dog or something, and he never made it out.
Well, that's
And
horrible.
yeah, it was horrible, man. And Larry was cool. He was nuts, but he was as real genuine as he could possibly get. And he was a fucking badass drummer too. But so that was the one show I did with him, and then like a week later that happened. And it kind of freaked me out a little bit, I was like, whoa, this is freaking wow, man. And then so they went and did that European tour. Um and then when they came back, Jay quit the band. Jay Blackowitz, he quit the band after that European tour. And right around Christmas time of, I'm going to say 97. Yeah, no, 96. I think it was around Christmas in 96. I had off for vacation, and I went up to South Carolina to visit Derek because I was like thinking about moving. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was going to maybe move to LA. I was going to maybe move. I knew I needed to do something to make a change. So I went up to visit Derek with the, thoughts of maybe I'll move to South Carolina or something. Well, in a couple days that I was up there visiting him, we got together and recorded a song. We wrote this song, recorded one tune called Hidden Hatred, right? Just on a little 4-track. And it came back home to Florida, and I was playing blues at the time. I had a little band going, and I would go to jams and stuff. And I specifically remember, Jay Blackowitz, he came to this jam that I was playing at. We were hanging out, and I was like, dude, I went up and, hung out with Derek, and we recorded this song. And I remember sitting in my little Volkswagen Fox and playing it for Jason. And Jason's like, holy shit, dude, we need to freaking start a band. We need to get there. I'm going to fly Derek down here for 2 weeks, and we're going to freaking write and record some shit. So, okay. And he did. So he flew Derek down, and Derek was down for about maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks. And within the first week, we jammed and we wrote like 6 freaking songs, right? And then recorded them in my living room in my apartment. I had a reel-to-reel 8-track, right? So we recorded those songs, a little demo. And by this time, I had made up my mind that I was moving out to LA, to Hollywood. I was going to try to go to the Guitar Institute. And this is when I was trying to, make the transition into playing other music besides the metal and stuff, and trying to further my musical knowledge and just become a better musician. And so I did. I quit my job at Motorola, and I planned to move to LA, which I did in 97. Well, the last thing I packed up before I moved, and I had all my shit packed up in boxes and everything, and the last thing to get packed up was my 8-track reel-to-reel, because we were finishing up mixing this demo that we had recorded with, we didn't even have the name Divine Empire yet. We had just gotten together and written these songs and recorded them. And so, we had this little 7-song demo, and Jay's like, you gotta promise me, dude, if I get us a deal, you'll come back and record an album with us and shit. Yeah, of course, absolutely. So I fucking pack up all my shit, my little Volkswagen Fox with the trailer on it, and quit my job at Motorola and moved to Hollywood, California. Of course, I broke down in Pascagoula, Mississippi, blowing head gasket, classic story, So I arrive in LA a couple days later, in a box truck with all my shit in there, towing my broke down car. And I remember pulling into Hollywood at like 10 o'clock at night, LA, and just looking around and going, holy shit, what have I done? Oh my God. But, and I lived out there for about 2 years. It was a great experience. Totally grew a lot and learned a ton. Most everybody in the building I was living in they were going to the GIT, PIT, Musicians Institute out there and stuff. So I never wound up going to the school because I couldn't afford it, but I would learn from all these other students that were there. So anyway, so after about 3 months of living in LA, Jay's calling me. He's like, dude, I've been sending that demo out, and I got us, this label, Olympic Records, wants to sign us, and out of Chicago, and I got us a deal, and we got a little tour booked and shit. I'm like, great. So I flew back home, flew back here to Florida, recorded the first Divine Empire album with those guys, and we started doing little tours, and that was my first experience, like, actually touring, and getting outside of Florida. And it was great. I thought it was amazing. I was like, wow, I really feel like I'm a real musician now. I'm out here on tour and playing, and playing these clubs and stuff. And that's pretty much how the Divine Empire started. And after
Wow.
about 4 or 5 times of doing tours and flying back to Florida and finding someone to rent my apartment out in LA and shit, after about a year and a half, 2 years, I finally just made the decision, like, oh, I'm just going to move back to Florida. You know, that's where my family is. That's where my friends are and stuff. And that's what I did. So in 98, oh, was it 99? Yeah, I think it was 99. I moved back to Florida.
Sucked you
Yeah.
back in that quick.
Sucked me back in. And then proceeded to record another, 4 albums with Divine Empire and
Yes, you did.
tour, go
Yeah.
to Europe.
And we're glad that you did, because some of the Divine Empire stuff is so amazing. And you talked about the demo, which a lot of those songs would come on the first LP, Redemption, which you
Yeah,
recorded with Mr. Jeremy Stoska at
correct.
Studio 13. Was that the first time or one of the earliest moments in which you were able to work with Jeremy? Did you know him before then?
No, I knew Jeremy way before that. I met Jeremy in 1989 during some of the first Raped Ape shows. He used to run sound at this place called Weekends in Boca. And that was my first experience with Jeremy. And I just remember, and all the guys in the band too, remember, we went in there and we played and like, oh shit, it sounds amazing. Like the sound, Jeremy had the sound dialed in like fucking so good, man. And we're like, holy shit, this guy knows his shit, man. So we would actually hire Jeremy sometimes to come out and run sound for these Raped Ape shows. And then, then he had, he had his band Sinful Lust and stuff. And first time we worked with Jeremy in the studio was 94, right? And we went and recorded a demo with him. And the way I found out about Jeremy recording, as I specifically remember this clear as day, we were playing some show up in Jacksonville or something with Amboogalard, and Jordy, the guitar player at the time, who went on to join Marilyn Manson, we're sitting in my little Volkswagen Fox, the same car I was telling you about. I played Jay the demo, and he's like, check this out, man. We went and recorded with Jeremy. We recorded a couple songs with him, and then he played it for me, and I was like, holy shit, it sounds amazing. And so we went and recorded the next Raped Ape demo with Jeremy, and that was in '94. So my history with Jeremy goes way back, and I'm still working with Jeremy. He's recorded pretty much all of my blues records.
Right.
And if he hasn't recorded, the next record I'm getting ready to put out, I didn't record with Jeremy, but I had Jeremy mix and master it, and I did record a lot of the overdubs and stuff that with Jeremy. So I still work with Jeremy. He's my go-to guy. He's another one I consider to be a genius, man. I can listen to recordings we did with him from back then, and they still sound good. They still stand the test of time, He'll argue that and be like, oh, that sounds horrible. I could do so much better now, which of course he can, but they still sound fucking good.
Yeah. And for those that haven't checked out Jeremy's episode on the podcast, that's another good one. So it's interesting to hear about some of the background and how you had a chance to connect with him running sound at weekends. I know when he was on the podcast, he talked about doing the sound also for some of the early Manson gigs too. Did you see them a lot back then? Did you ever have any shows with those guys back in the
we did.
that time?
Yeah. First time I saw them was at Summers on the Beach. It was when they first started out. They were called Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids. They didn't even have a drummer. They just had a little drum machine and like a guy on this small little keyboard thing, and it was cool. I was like, this is cool stuff. And then later on they got a drummer and everything, and they became Marilyn Manson, and we wind up on some shows with them and stuff. And Brian always liked Raped Ape. You'll hear him talk about Pooch sometimes and stuff, and and shit. But I remember seeing them a couple years later, right kind of maybe a year before they got signed and stuff, and did all that, with Trent Reznor and everything. And I remember seeing them play I think it was at the +2 or the +5 down in Davie. Yeah, +5.
Right, +5. Mm-hmm.
And they played, and I remember watching them on stage and saying to myself, like, they just had this look and this vibe and this image, and all these kids following them around with lunchboxes and spandex and tight, these girls and stuff, and like they had this whole little thing and this image and this vibe. And I remember watching them on stage and saying to myself, like, man, I could totally see these guys. They looked like something you would see on MTV, and they had this certain sound and this, but more so this image and this vibe, Yeah.
Well, you weren't wrong.
It didn't surprise me when they got big and stuff.
Right. Certainly. It's cool to hear some of those early stories, though, and how there were all these connections back then and
Yeah.
in the scene. And with the Divine Empire years, you had mentioned there was quite a number of releases that the band had put out. Any of your fondest memories from the Divine Empire years that really stand out for you when it comes to the music?
Um, the first album was, was definitely you know, I mean, song wise, it was great, but I think just as far as tightness goes, like once Derek wasn't in the band anymore, we never really recaptured that, what we had. Of course, we went on to record some really good records and wrote some good songs, but it never, you know, um, it never, we never got back to that same tightness that we had with Derek, that effortless, I mean, as far as that style of drumming, I think he's hands down probably the best drummer there is for that kind of stuff,
Sure.
just, you know. So, the first record was cool. And then the other ones were cool too, and also by that time I was really heavily into the blues and stuff. I was already playing in bands and I was trying to, you know, that was really my true heartfelt passion, was trying to get more into that scene and stuff. I couldn't see myself being in my 50s playing that music. Although now that I am in my 50s, I'm like, well, I could still do that shit,
Yeah.
Yeah. And I still love it, man. I still
Right.
like that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah.
When you were with Divine Empire, you talked about that was one of the first times you did a significant amount of touring.
Exactly. And well, that was another thing with that band, is that was my first, you know, uh, foray and experience into actually touring and going out for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And, we went over to Europe. First time I went to Europe was with Divine Empire, and those were amazing experiences, getting to experience that for the first time and stuff. And, we played some pretty big festivals over there, and we would tour with uh, these package tours and stuff. I think one of the first ones we were out with like Gorguts and Cryptopsy, and then we did another tour. We did some tours with the Dying Fetus and stuff. So, all the clubs would usually be packed, and stuff. So it was awesome. And in fact, I was just watching some videos the other day of some of those old shows and stuff, and I look at the crowds. I'm like, holy shit, man! We were playing in front of a lot of people, you know. Some of those festivals over in Europe were, those were some of the biggest crowds that I played for, Um, and another great thing, about touring with Divine Empire was touring with these bands, other bands, and becoming friends with all those guys. Like that's, we in '99 we did that tour with U.S. tour with Emperor, and then I think it was Emperor, Percatum, uh, Bortnagar, and that was my first, kind of introduction to that whole black metal scene and stuff, and it was cool, man. And those guys were all really nice people and stuff, and that's how I formed the relationship with Samuth from Emperor and put out those 2 records on his label,
Right.
Nocturnal Art Productions, with Jason Morgan and the Winjara stuff. And um, when you go on tour with the bands like that, it's like this, you form this bond. It's almost like this, I don't know how to explain it. It's like this spiritual connection almost too, that you form with these folks, and then you see them late, years and years later, and it's just, it's like you never left. So it's definitely a special thing.
Right. One thing, and this may sound a little funny, but one thing I appreciated about Divine Empire with a lot of the other bands of that era and even today is the way that the name was stylized with the tree branches. It'd be really hard to make out the name sometimes. But on all the Divine Empire
Oh,
flyers and albums, you can easily tell that the name is Divine Empire.
yeah. Yeah, Jay did that logo. Jason Lakowitz, he's the one that came up with the logo. He's also the one that came up with the Malevolent Creation logo. That was
Oh,
Jason.
okay. I would
He's a
love to.
tattoo artist now. He's a great tattoo artist, man. He's always been a great artist.
Yeah.
Yeah, we see each other. He comes out to gigs and stuff, man.
And
That's pretty
then
much it.
was there anything in between that was more metal, or did you go right into the band that you would form with other former members of Raped Ape and what have you, Burner?
No, that burner happened early on. That happened in the early 2000s. That was like 2001 or two, yeah. And that's when I was still playing in Divine Empire, and
Oh,
we
okay.
used to practice in our Divine Empire warehouse, and the drummer actually was Greg Threckle that used to play with Fatal Sin. He and I knew each other, still good friends. In fact, I spoke with him yesterday on Facebook and stuff. We were chatting back and forth, but so that started as just me and I lived in Boca and Greg lived in Boca, and we we'd get a fucking bag of weed and we'd go sit at the warehouse till 4 o'clock in the morning and record and stuff, just the two of us. And that's how the whole burner came about. Before we know it, we had all these songs, and then Phil from Malevolent had a label called Arctic Music Group.
Right.
Right. And I played Phil the demo that we had, and he's like, dude, I want to put that out, man. Let's record an album. I said, all right, let's do it, man. And so we recorded that burner album with Jeremy Stoskin, and that album still sounds freaking great, man. It stands the test of time. In fact, Newsted really liked that record. Jason loved
Oh,
that record.
okay.
When I turned him on to that, I gave him the Raped Ape, I gave him some of the Divine Empire stuff, and then I gave him the burner, and he liked all of it. But the burner was the one that you know, he really dug that.
Did you all do a lot of shows as Burner?
We did. We used to play. There's a place called the Metal Factory in Fort Lauderdale. It used to be Rosebuds. I don't even know what it is now, but yeah, the guy would have us come in, and we would wind up opening for like some of these like metal bands from back in the day or something. Like I remember we opened up for like Bullet Boy, and we opened up for Leslie West. We opened up for Leslie West, and we'd always get these crazy gigs, opening up for some of these like has been metal bands or something. And not to sound arrogant, but we would always kick their ass, man. And we were tuned down to low B and stuff, and that was a fun band. It was all about the groove and the riffs and shit, and it was a lot of fun, man, doing that band. And that band, lasted about. We did it for a couple of years, and then just kind of fizzled out because we couldn't get a bass player and shit, and just finally. And then Greg, the drummer, moved. He moved up to Colorado, relocated up there with his family and stuff, and
Mhm.
that was pretty much the end of that. But it's still a great record. I've listened to it now, and I'm like, man, it's so freaking good. Jeremy Stoska, man. Jeremy recorded all the Divine Empire records as
He
well.
did. And they all
Hmm.
sound fantastic.
Yeah, and like I said, he's recorded. I mean, I've got seven. Well, now I will have 7 blues albums out, when we release this next one in May. But Jeremy's recorded 5 out of those. And the last record, like I said, I recorded it up in Ohio, but I had Jeremy mix and master it and stuff. And just I love working with Jeremy. We've worked together so long, it's just effortless, to work together. And I know working with Jeremy at the end of the day, it's going to come out sounding freaking great. It's going to sound proper.
When it came to transitioning more completely to the blues, what do you remember being your last metal release that you worked on?
The last one was the last Divine Empire record. God, I can't even think of the name of it right now.
The last record you all had done, was that the Method of Execution?
Method of Execution. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. That was the last record we did. We recorded that with Jeremy, and it's a great record. It's got some really cool songs on it. Um, And the last tour I did was 2005, that European tour with Testament and stuff, which was a great tour. I mean, we were playing big rooms, packed rooms and stuff. And I became really good friends with Alex Skolnick because he was into jazz and stuff. And it's crazy because when a funny little tidbit, when, you know, he and I became, good friends on that tour, and we would sit around and jam. I was really into the gypsy jazz stuff, learning the Django Reinhardt. And I had a band doing that. So when we came back home, like from that tour, like 3 months later, his band, his trio, his jazz band was playing in Fort Lauderdale, this small little club. And we opened up for them with my gypsy jazz band. So like 3 months prior, we're opening up for Testament with Divine Empire. 3 months later, I'm opening up for Alex's jazz trio with my gypsy jazz band.
Right.
Yeah, crazy, man.
It is crazy.
But that was the last, that was really the last metal stuff that I did was 2005. So yeah, it's been over 20 years now.
And when you went full on with the blues and started playing out more, started to form your own cohesive bands and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Did you find that was like starting over again, or was it just like you kept going because you were already doing this to a various degree while you were still in the metal years?
I was already doing it, and the kind of way I made the transition into doing that was I was working at a little music store here in Boca, right? And I was teaching. I had about 20 students. Now I'm self-taught myself. I never really took lessons. The music store closed down, and I just, well, fuck it. I'm not going to go get another job or nothing. I'm going to keep these 20 students that I have, keep playing gigs, and then eventually I got so busy with the gigs that I couldn't teach anymore because I really didn't have time. So that's kind of how I made the, transition. And I've been playing music and making my living solely from playing music for the past over 20 years. And it didn't happen for me. I'm 57. I just turned 57. So that didn't happen for me until I was in my, mid 30s to late 30s, before I was actually able to solely, make a living playing music and be, a professional musician.
Right.
And I'm not huge and rich and famous or anything like that, but I love what I do. I don't dread getting up in the morning and going to some job that I'd rather not. When I worked for Motorola and stuff like that, I hated it. I hated waking up in the morning and going to that job because I knew this is not what I'm supposed to be doing, And I worked all kind of jobs throughout my life, from delivering pizzas to cooking in restaurants to digging ditches to doing painting houses to doing electrician's work, anything I could do. I lived in warehouses when I was, when we were playing in Raped Ape. I lived in our warehouse for a time and stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was that one of the most interesting places you ever had to live in?
Yep. Absolutely. But it was cool. I didn't mind it, man. I was like, I did it. And at the time I was just like, man, this is what I'm doing.
Did you guys practice at that warehouse too?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We practiced in there. And I, lived on the little couch and would walk across the street and to the gas station and brush my teeth and freshen up.
Wow. Okay.
Go take a shower at a friend's house or something like that. And no, I mean, I didn't live there for like I maybe lived there for a few months or something at various times, things like that. But I didn't care because the music was the most important thing to me. That was what I wanted to do. And
throughout your blues period, who else has come into your circle? Did you get a chance to work with any other people, or as you've been going all over, I imagine you've also won awards for your playing and what you've done there. So what's that been like?
It's been awesome, man. I've met some pretty interesting folks along the way. People that you wouldn't expect that wound up becoming fans and are digging what I do. I mean, I remember we were playing one night, and Tony Orlando and Don came into the gig and they loved the band. They sat in with the band, and Tony gave me his phone number, which I still have on my phone, and we became friends and shit. And another one I met I was on this playing this blues cruise, the legendary rhythm and blues cruise that they do a couple times a year. And Dion was on the boat, the Wanderer, Dion, you know,
Sure.
who actually, he lives here in Boca, actually. He and I connected. He sat in with us and stuff and became a fan and shit. And, you know, and you know, I still have a couple messages saved on my phone from him that he left. You know, he's like, "Hey, JP, it's Dion DiMucci here. You know, calling the, you know, like I got to save those messages, man. There's no one will believe me if I." If I don't. And just you know, instances like that where it's like, wow, you know, you meet these folks and you know, and then again, you know, becoming friends with Jason Newsted through the blues scene, you know, it's like, wow, that's a full circle, you know, and then getting him to play on one of my records was like, you know, like, holy shit, you know, how did that happen?
With some of the awards that you have had the opportunity to, one, just be nominated is an amazing feat.
Yeah,
And then to
absolutely.
actually win is another level altogether, I feel like. So talk about what that's like for you, because I imagine someone like yourself, you don't do what you do for awards. You do what you do because you're
No,
passionate, you love it. So
absolutely.
what is it like for you when you do get a chance to be in front of folks who are awarding for
It's,
your work, your music?
I mean, to me, it's almost like, um, it feels awkward to me sometimes to win an award or something like that. Um, but it's a nice nod of approval and like a little, almost like a token of validation or something, like okay, well, I guess I can do this. I must be doing something right if these folks are recognizing this sort of stuff, you know. But it's exactly what you said. I mean, I don't have any of these awards displayed or anything like that. um, for me, the greatest award and reward is when someone comes up at the end of the night after a gig or something and they shake my hand and they say thank you. You know, I had the best time tonight. I've been feeling down, or I've been going through this or that, and tonight made me forget about all that. And thank you so much. You know, that for me is the best validation and an award or reward that I could possibly get, to know that I'm making somebody happy, helping them get through whatever they might be going through, or you know, just you know, um, touching in them in some way, in a positive way that you know, is bringing them joy and bringing them happiness. That for me is, you know, and when that happens, I say to myself, I'm doing exactly, you know, exactly what I'm meant to do and what I was placed on this
Yeah.
earth to do. Yeah.
It's great to hear. And when I think about your discography, the release Southbound I-95, this being a very Florida centric podcast, you do have some songs on there that are very Florida.
Oh yeah.
One in particular, Deep Down in Florida, Ain't
Yeah.
No Dania Beach.
Yeah. That Deep Down in Florida, that's a Muddy Waters tune. That's an old Muddy Waters song. Yeah. And like I said, the Southbound 95, Jason Newsted's playing bass on that track, which is insane. And what's funny about that song, right? I got a friend of mine, Joel Da Silva. He's a local musician down here, a blues guy. He used to be in a band called the Hepcat Poo Daddies. And I've known Joel for a long time. We had a side band together in the early 2000s. When I was still playing in Burner and Divine Empire, he and I had this side project called the Sideburns, right? And anyway, so it was around 2017 or something, maybe 16. And you know, Joel was you know, wanting to put out a record and stuff, and I had already put out a couple of my own myself, blues records. And I said, well, Joel, I'd love to help you do that. You know, maybe I can help put up some of the money to, you know, help you record and stuff. And he sent me some songs that he had, and they were good, but they didn't have the same vibe as, like, the Hepcat Boo Daddies were like these kind of surf. They had a little punk rock surf vibe thing going on, you know. And I was like, that's the Joel that I, you know, that I know and love, you know, that kind of stuff. So I told him, I said, Joe, I said, I said, I'll just try to, I'm going to write, I said to myself, I said, I'm just going to try to write a song for Joel, you know, in that vein, you know, that kind of surf rock. And I wrote the Southbound 95. And once I finished writing the song, I was like, I'm going to keep this for myself. So that's how that song came about, you know, and the lyrics, like basically, like a lot of times when we're, you know, coming home from doing a tour with the blues band, you know, we might finish in like, you know, uh, Alexander, Virginia, or Falls Church, Virginia, or something like that. Maybe that's the last show of the tour. And we get up and we start driving to Florida, and we're like, and, you know, heading down I-95, you know. And so, you know, we're on our way to Florida. And usually, you know, after about 10 hours or so driving, we're like, oh shit, you know, we're kind of getting tired. But once we cross over into Florida, we get this second wind, and we're just like, fuck it, let's just keep on going, man. We're in home now, even though
Right.
we got another 6 hours to go. Let's just keep on going. So that's kind of how the lyrics for that came, you know, Southbound 95.
I also saw Lee Oskar
Yeah.
was credited on that. And is that the same Lee Oskar who helped found the band War?
Yes, it is.
How did that connection come about?
Man, that's another crazy freaking connection. I was again on one of these rhythm and blues crews, legendary rhythm and blues crews, um, playing with this other project that I do called Southern Hospitality, and that has a guitar player, singer from Tampa area, Damon Fowler. He has his own band. He's been putting out records for years, and Victor Wainwright, piano player singer from Savannah, Georgia, who again has his own band and puts out records. And we come together and do this band called Southern Hospitality. We've been doing that since 2013, I believe. Yeah. And I go down to check out the stage, one of the stages we're going to be playing, you know, a couple hours before we're scheduled to play. So let me go down there and just see what kind of backline they got, amps and shit like that, so I kind of know what I'm in for. Well, Lee Oskar was on that blues cruise as well as one of the artists, and he was doing this workshop, harmonica workshop thing, and I walked in while he was doing it. But so after he finishes the little seminar, I went up to him and I was like, introduced myself and hey, you know, my name's JP. We're gonna play with this band, Southern Hospitality. We're gonna be playing on the same stage here in a couple hours. And I just said, man, I really love, you know, what you were explaining about the harmonic minor scale and all this kind of stuff. And you know, and he was really cool, you know, and I'd seen him sit in with Los Lobos the night before, right? And he he didn't really like they didn't really give him a lot of space to play or whatever. I forget what it was, but I was like, yeah, I saw you sit in the other night and it's great. I said, but man, if you want to come back tonight, sit in with Southern Hospitality, man. I go, I got this tune where you could totally utilize that harmonica that you were just explaining with that scale and shit. It's this minor Latin little thing, and he's like, sure, man, I'll come and sit in with you guys, and he did, and we played another 3 or 4 times on the boat with Southern Hospitality, and every time we played, he came and sat in with us. And he's like, "Hey, man, if you ever need some harmonica or something, you know, on anything, let me know. I'd love to be a part." So I was like, "Okay, awesome, man. Lee Oskar, fuck, man.
Of
That's it,
course.
right?"
Yeah.
So, you know, about a year later, you know, maybe I was recording the Southbound 95 record with Jeremy, of course, and there's a particular tune on there. It's a little instrumental called Across the Desert. And I called Lee. I said, hey, man, I got this song that, you know, I said, you mentioned, you know, you'd be willing to play on something. And I go, I got this tune that I think you'd be great for. And I sent him the tune, and he wound up playing on it. He recorded the tracks. He lives in Seattle. He recorded the tracks there and sent them back to us and stuff. And full circle stuff. I was like, wow, I got freaking, you know, Lee Oskar, the guy that
Right.
played on Lowriders, playing on my fucking record, man. And Jason Newsted's playing on the title track of the record. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It blows my mind. I still sometimes I I look back on it, I still can't believe it. I'm like, man, how did I get to this point? You know,
Yeah.
and I mean, like I said, I'm self-taught. You know, I learned just by latching on to good musicians, and I've been very fortunate enough to get to play with some really good musicians and players and stuff. one in particular who's playing on just about every one of my records is a sax player, singer, um, Terry Hank. His name's Terry Hank. He used to play with Elvin Bishop back in the day, the Fooled Around and Fell in Love era. But Terry played with him in that era. Terry played with, Etta James and a bunch of other folks. He's, you can see him playing on the Midnight Special, with Elvin, back in the 70s and stuff, late 70s. But Terry lives here in Florida, and I played with his band quite a bit. My drummer and not my drummer, but Chris Pete, a drummer that I play with. We played with Terry quite a bit, for many years. And Terry's been kind of like a mentor to me. I watched how he ran his show and how he put the show together, and so he's another one that just an amazing influence, and he's still playing his ass off. He's 81 years old.
Wow.
And he's still, we played New Year's Eve together, and he's still playing great, singing great, total inspiration. I'm like, wow, he's 81 years old, and he's still, anytime I start feeling like, oh, I'm getting kind of old or something or whatever, I think about Terry, and I'm like, shit,
Right.
I still got plenty of time.
You got at least 30 more years, JP.
Yeah, man.
That is just amazing to hear. And throughout all the time that you've been doing your blues material, the shows, the records you've been putting out, do you still have run-ins with people at your shows where they remember you from the metal years?
Oh, yeah, all the time. And it'll happen. Sometimes I'll know somebody for a long time and then come to realize that they were, they were back in that scene. They're like, holy shit, you used to play in that band. I used to go see you guys. I'm like, yeah, that's me, man. I'm still the same dude. And I pull out my hair and I'm like, yeah, I still got my long hair. I'm still the same dude. Yeah. In fact, last night, a friend of mine came to the show that I haven't seen in a long time, man. This guy, Rob Flynn. And we known each other since high school and stuff. And, so he, knew me before I was in any of the metal bands or anything like that. And he came to the show, and his girlfriend that he was dating, that he brought with him, she's like, oh, you used to play in Raped Ape. I used to come see you guys play, back at this club and stuff. You're in that band? I go, yeah. So yeah, it happens. It does happen. It's pretty funny when it does.
I bet that's another full circle moment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like I said, I was telling you earlier, the other night I ran into George Kokoris, the drummer from Ambugalard, who I hadn't seen in like 30 years. And if you look on his page, he pranked me good, man. He got me really good. Like he came to our gig. We were playing in Jensen Beach. This was just last Wednesday. And he, our bass player was outside packing up, and I was inside settling up with the club, getting paid and everything. And he, told our bass player who he was and stuff. And he's like, I'm going to prank JP. He hasn't seen me in like 30 years. He won't recognize me. So he sat in the passenger seat of our van, right? So me and Chris, our drummer, we walk out to the van to leave, and we open the door, and there's this dude sitting in the passenger seat where I normally sit. And Chris drives, our drummer, Chris, he does all the driving. There's this, I open the door and there's this dude, and George is a big guy, man. I didn't recognize him. And he's like, hey, what's up? And I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, I'm your new roadie. I just got hired on. Your bass player just hired me as your new roadie, I work really hard, and I just wonder if I can just tag along and be your roadie. And I'm like, okay. He goes, and he's like, yeah, I got a lot of experience. I used to work with this band in Lauderdale called Ambugalard. And I'm like, Ambugalard? I don't know Ambugalard. I go, holy shit, George. That's what as soon as he said Ambugalard, I was like, damn, he got me so good, man. But that was a really cool, I hadn't seen him in freaking 30 years. He posted it on his page. It's pretty funny, man.
Wow.
He was recording it while he was getting me, but that was awesome. Yeah.
It's fun to get ribbed in that way from someone you go way back with, and you didn't recognize them all these years later.
Totally didn't recognize them. But yeah, pretty neat, man.
It is neat. It's great to hear some of those stories, and the fact that you get to have those moments, because again, so many people tend to move away and life has a way of
Yeah.
shifting things around.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
where do people typically find you these days? As far as, are there any places that you play more regular?
Yeah.
Where are folks able to find you?
Well, I do have my website, jpsoars.com, and I post all my dates on there. But I have quite a few places that I play that are monthly gigs, you know. There's a place in Lake Worth called the Bamboo Room. I play there once a month on Sundays. There's a place in Wellington, Florida called the Village Music Cafe. I play there once a month. Um, I got quite a few places on the west coast of Florida that I play once a month. There's a place called Inglewoods, which is in Inglewood, Florida. Do that once a month. Um, there's a place we're playing actually today later on. It's called Sugar Shack downtown. It's in Bonita Springs. I play there about once a month, once every 2 months. So yeah, I got my little you know, monthly certain places that I play. And then we tour, we go out and tour and stuff, and we play festivals. And, a lot of times we'll fly into festivals and, just do a little one-off thing or a weekend or something like that.
Sure. What's changed for you, both mentally and physically, from when you would go on tour and play different towns and states and what have you back then to what it may be like for you today?
Um, well, it's still exciting, but, you know, touring is not as exciting as it used to be. At 57, I definitely, I feel it a lot more now than I did when I was in my, late 30s and 40s and stuff, early 40s. I would do 2 gigs a day, sometimes 3 gigs a day. I can't really do that anymore. I need my
That's a
rest.
lot. That's a marathon.
Yeah, yeah. But um, and I know what I'm in for now. I I still get nervous before I go doing tours and stuff, make sure I got everything packed up that I need. And I still get nervous before shows, and it can be the biggest show or it can be the smallest show. I mean, for instance, if my family is going to show up to a gig or, a friend that I might haven't seen in a while, I get nervous, I still get really nervous before gigs sometimes. Um, and as far as just physically, I try to do something every day as far as, working out, whether it's going swimming. I've been doing that for years, for 20 some odd years now. And over the past couple of years, I started going to the gym a little bit and just, doing light weights and elliptical machine, that sort of stuff. And the past few months, I got into kayaking. I love that. Getting out on the water, getting out in the nature, away from everything.
Sure.
Very grounding, good for the spirit and the soul, and a good way to just get grounded,
Does that inspire you at all musically too?
Absolutely, absolutely. I've been bringing my um, I got this little instrument called a stick dulcimer. It's a small little. I'll show it. And I bring this. It's called a stick dulcimer. But I bring that out on the kayak with me and stuff. And yeah, it's inspiring. Yeah, I've already written a couple little things out there. But I try to you know keep a nice balance between that, between exercising and I don't really, I never really been into drinking and stuff. I'm not a huge partier or anything like
Right.
that, so I don't have any of that kind of shit to deal with. Uh, and I feel pretty good at 57. Yeah, but I feel good for 57. I feel really good, man.
Yeah, you look great, man.
Yeah,
I mean,
thank you, man.
and I'm glad that you have a full head of hair, so there's
Yeah,
no
man.
baldness
I never
there.
cut it. I never cut it short, even through the
Well,
whole.
sometimes you don't have that option. Sometimes it goes on its
No,
own,
yeah,
right?
it's true. Yeah, but
You
even
don't
through
have
the
that
whole
problem.
period where everyone was, where it wasn't cool to have long hair anymore or something. I just always kept it long. And anytime I think about cutting it, which I do sometimes, I'll tell my mom or something about it. Or she says, "I don't do that. You'll hate it. You'll freaking hate it. Don't do that." But
Well,
I never do.
You still have your metal roots, both literally
Exactly.
and
Like I said,
figuratively.
if I get that call from, Morbid Angel or Cannibal Corpse or Slayer or something, and they need to fill in for a minute, nah, I'm good to go, man. Let's
You're
do it.
good to go. You got your horns and you got your hair.
That's right, man. And I still got my guitars and my
There you
gear.
go. Well,
Yeah.
I can't begin to tell you, JP, how an honor it is to have you on the podcast to tell your story. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome, man. It's an honor to be on here.
It's
Thank
amazing.
you.
It's amazing to take that trip back through your entire journey. Again, going back to the earliest beginnings, you mentioned that you were in a cover band called Fugitive. And now here we are all these years later, and you're
Yeah.
still out there playing music, so passionate about it. And just thanks again for being such a wonderful guest. And we're going to get ready to close things out. So
Thank
I
you.
would love to give you the last word. Any final thoughts you'd like to share to the folks out there, both watching this episode on YouTube, but also checking it out as they are listening to it? The floor is yours to take us home.
Well, I just want to say thank you to anybody who's, believed in what I do or shown any sort of support, and all the folks that have inspired me throughout the years, from Pooch to Phil, and from Malevolent, just all these folks, and you know, um, and all the people that support the music and enjoy it and get it. Thank you guys so much, and I feel very grateful and blessed to get to do what I do, and I never for a second take it for granted, ever. And I'm very appreciative and thankful for having the blessings and the opportunities to be able to do what I do for a living, and bring joy to people and make folks happy. It's the greatest job in the world.